Okay, we may have people struggling in, but I think it's probably good to get this started. So I wanted to give a warm welcome to all of you to the inaugural early career event in children and young people's mental health at UCL. As you all no doubt know, UCL has a lot of world-class interdisciplinary research and training in children and young people's mental health. And we have people using really state-of-the-art methods and developing new theories in relation to children and young people's mental health. And we thought that it would be really, really good to get a regular program started for early career researchers in this area. You may all be aware that both the research councils and also various charities have been recently investing to children and young people's mental health quite considerably. This is a long overdue investment, and there's hope that it will result in a lot of new knowledge that will help us prevent and intervene with children and young people who have either risk for mental health problems or who've already developed some mental health problems. And obviously, in order to do this work systematically and sustainably, there needs to be a lot of capacity building in this area. And I think UCL is really in a strong position to provide training that is at the cutting edge in this area. And you all represent the sort of the new generation, the great hope for the children and young people's mental health. So without further ado, I'm going to hand over to John, who's going to chair the flash talk session. Then there will be a time for us all to network in Gathertown for a little bit, and then we come back for the panel discussion. And hopefully at some point in the coming year, there will be an opportunity to do one of these events in person, but at the moment we unfortunately can't. But I think we're all quite used to these online meetings now, and I'm really looking forward to the talks and discussions today. So I'll hand over to John.
Thanks very much, Essie. Essie, of course, far too modest to note that she has actually recently been awarded a very important grant with PESCO FEAR on children and young people's mental health from UKRI. And I agree, this just underscores how important this area is going to be, especially over the next 5 to 10 years ago. So it's amazing that we have so many brilliant early career researchers in this area. And so that's really the point of today's symposium. So what we decided would be nice to do is to hear from a real range of disciplines in the area, which is obviously very broad across UCL. So we've got 8 outstanding speakers who are each going to give us a flash talk. So really short, high-level overview of their work with some data, hopefully, as well. And then at the end, and there'll be 4 minutes each. And at the end of each talk, we're going to have 1 minute, which is probably enough to ask one question for each of the speakers. So please, as the talk is going on, think carefully about which questions you'd like to ask. And probably the easiest thing to do is to put them in the chat, or I will also keep an eye on the hands raised. So if you prefer to ask a question in person, that's fine. You can just raise your hand. But it really will be a case of probably one question each. If it's very quick, maybe we'll be able to squeeze in 2 questions each, so that we can break in time to do the networking event, which is going to start at 11. So get your attention caps on. It's going to be quick, and I'm sure it's going to be absolutely fascinating. So the first person in the lineup is Dr. Abby Thompson. Abby, do you want to start sharing your slides?
Yeah, sure.
So Abby is a postdoc in the Clinical, Educational and Health Psychology Department at UCL, and she's going to be talking about the effects of cognitive control training on COVID-19 related mental health outcomes. Take it away, Abby. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, so cognitive control is the ability to withhold prepotent responses in pursuit of goals. And importantly, it's been linked to a range of other domains and real-life outcomes, including mental health. So in particular, mental health impairments across a number of clinical conditions have been linked to deficits in cognitive control. And importantly, studies have suggested that cognitive control may be malleable during childhood due to increased plasticity. And for example, this may be achievable via computer-based training. So in this study, we wanted to ask, what is the effect of cognitive control training on mental health outcomes in childhood, and in particular in the presence of a stressor, which was COVID-19. So by this, we mean the stress of the restrictions that were implemented in response to COVID-19. So to investigate this, we recruited 226 children between the ages of 6 and 13 years, with a mean age of 9.05 years. We used a host of mental health measures, which were all parent response measures. So these included the Child and Adolescent Symptom Inventory, the Strengths and Difficulties Questionnaire, and the Apathy Evaluation Scale. And for this presentation, I'll just be focusing on the Apathy Evaluation Scale. So participants completed these measures at multiple time points. So firstly, before and also after COVID-19 restrictions were first implemented in the UK. And in addition to this, we also had one more time point a year later, which will allow us to look at the long-term effects of training. But for this presentation, I'm just focusing on the first 2 time points. So in the intervening period between these first 2 time points, participants completed an 8-week course of training. And they were either allocated to an experimental group or to a control group. And in both cases, the training that was delivered was based on a very simple task, which varied between the 2 groups, but it was matched very closely in terms of intensity and delivery. So for both groups, the training was delivered in a gamified format, which makes sure that it's engaging and kind of motivating for participants. And also importantly, we used a number of different contexts for this. So we had a host of different games for them to play, which is one way to ensure that the training is maximally effective. So in terms of the results, when looking at the apathy scores before and then after COVID restrictions were put in place, we found that there was an increase in apathy. And this was significant across total apathy scores and also across a cognitive apathy subscale. We also found an interesting interaction for the emotional apathy subscale, whereby the control group displayed an increase in apathy over this time period, whereas this wasn't the case for the experimental group. So for the group that received cognitive control training, their apathy scores remained stable across this time period. So in terms of discussion, we found that apathy increased when measured before and after COVID-19 restrictions. And cognitive control training seemed to buffer these adverse effects of COVID-19 on emotional apathy. So in terms of next steps, we're going to look at the brain regions mediating this effect, also look at the long-term effects and look at the other mental health outcomes that we measured. So just to say thank you to the rest of the DCP lab, because this was a very large team effort, and thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much, Abby. Fabulous start to the session and perfectly to time as well. So I'm now going to invite anybody from the audience either to put up your hand, and I will try and keep an eye on it, or to pop a question in the chat if you'd prefer. But you're going to have to be quick, because if we don't have some coming quickly, then Essie or I will ask a question.
I'm happy to.
Okay, why don't you go ahead then, Essie?
So Abby, why do you think that the cognitive control training protects against development of apathy? Do you think it sort of increases self-efficacy in people, or what do you think the reason is that you see this finding?
Yeah, well, so apathy is defined as a loss of motivation associated with reduced goal-directed behaviour, and inhibitory control does facilitate goal-directed behaviour. So I think there is a crossover there in terms of the kind of mechanism, and there's also an overlap in terms of brain regions involved. But this is something that we're, these results are fairly new, so we're kind of looking into in a bit more detail.
Okay, and I can see we do have one hand in the audience, so it's got to be very quick. Andrew, do you want to quickly ask your question?
Hey, I think my mic's not working, is it?
It's fine, we can hear you.
Oh, brilliant. Thanks so much. That was really interesting. What do you think was the reason that the apathy scores went up in the control group then?
Yeah, well, I think for both groups, I think that just the restrictions in terms of COVID clearly had some kind of knock-on effect in terms of increased apathy. I do think it's interesting because these are also parent report measures, and it would have been nice to have some child report measures of apathy. But yeah, I think that that's a response to the COVID restrictions that were put in place. So the closures of schools and you know, having to stay home and all of those kind of things.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Abby. We're going to have to move on. I said it would be flash. So do you want to stop sharing your screen? Yeah. And then our next speaker is going to be Dr. Lenny Neal, who's also a postdoctoral researcher in developmental psychopathology in the Division of Psychology and Language Sciences. Are you ready, Lenny?
I'm ready.
Okay, take it away. Thank you.
Hi, yeah, I'm Lenny from the Developmental Risk and Resilience Unit that's directed by SC along with Amy McCrory. So today I'm going to tell you a bit about a study which is just accepted for publication, which we're really pleased about. It's about trust and childhood maltreatment. So although many children are remarkably resilient, we know that childhood maltreatment is associated with mental health and relationship difficulties later on in life. And according to the Latent Vulnerability Account, maltreatment-driven neurocognitive adaptations might have an impact on children's social relationships in the longer term. And one thing that we all recognise as crucial to social relationships is trust. And although difficulties trusting have been observed a lot in clinical contexts in individuals with histories of maltreatment, the components of trust haven't really been investigated kind of mechanistically or experimentally. So we used a straightforward facial trustworthiness judgment task. We randomly selected 10 distinct identities from a set of 25 from Todorov et al. And each of these identities was manipulated to vary on 7 points along a computationally modeled trustworthiness dimension from the least trustworthy to the most trustworthy. So the face on the left there, that's the least trustworthy, and the one on the right, the most, but it's the same identity. And we showed children the stimuli and just asked, is this face trustworthy, yes or no? And so separately from our maltreatment study, we gave the task to a normative sample of over 400 children in schools. And we used an opt-out rather than an opt-in consent procedure. And that just meant that in any given class, almost everyone took part. So it kind of reduced the selection bias there. So on the y-axis here, we have the proportion of yes trustworthiness judgments. And that study showed, you know, the facial stimuli worked in this with children and in this kind of cultural context. And our 2-week retest was cut short by the pandemic, but in this kind of small sample, it looks like it is acceptable. So for our childhood maltreatment study, we recruited 75 children with documented histories of maltreatment. That was with the support of Camden and Islington and Hammersmith and Fulham Children's Services. And we used a pairwise matching approach to match the children with 70 children without documented histories of maltreatment on gender and age and IQ, socioeconomic status and ethnicity distribution. And our questionnaire measures indicated that children in the maltreatment group had significantly reduced social competence and pro-social behaviour. And interestingly, given what Abby's just talked about, we also included a measure of apathy. And children in the maltreatment group, this is a self-report measure, they reported significantly higher levels of apathy. So here are the results. This is our psychometric functions. So I've just highlighted the bias here. So that's the mean stimuli level at which children in the group were equally likely to say yes or no. So it's significantly higher among children with the documented histories of maltreatment. So that just means they require high levels of trustworthiness in order to offer a trustworthy judgment. And the trust judgments were also significantly more variable in the maltreatment group. So we hypothesized that trust bias might contribute to a phenomenon known as social thinning, where the quality and quantity of social relationships diminishes over time. In the maltreatment group, neither of our concurrent social functioning measures were associated with children's propensity to trust, but there was a moderate association with children's self-reported apathy scores. So it may be that trust bias diminishes the perceived benefits of kind of actively engaging, initiating interactions with others, potentially. And we've just finished our 18-month follow-up. So we've collected some questionnaire measures from caregivers and children. So we'll be able to see whether any atypicalities predict the development of social and psychological symptoms over time. And these are just the key points to finish. So we provide the first experimental evidence that a community sample of children with documented maltreatment judge unfamiliar faces as less trustworthy. And we think trust bias of unfamiliar faces could potentially index a latent vulnerability for the development of mental health problems, potentially via diminishing social networks.
Brilliant. Again, perfectly to time. Thanks so much, Lenny. So we have a question already come in from the audience, and it's from Elle, and she asked what the inclusion and exclusion criteria were for your maltreatment group.
Yeah, so we recruited young people through social services. So we knew that they would have documented history of maltreatment, and all the social workers completed a questionnaire called the Kaufman scale, where it's a quantitative scale where they indicate in 4 categories: neglect, domestic, home violence, emotional maltreatment, and sexual abuse. So we had that kind of documented, and so that meant that they were included in the study.
Thank you so much. Okay, I think because of the flash talk format, we are going to have to move on to make sure we fit everyone in. So thank you so much, Lenny. And now we've got next Magda Dubois. Magda, do you want to start sharing your screen?
Yes.
Thank you, Magda. Go ahead, I'll just introduce you while you do that. So Magda's a PhD student in the Max Planck UCL Center for Computational Psychiatry and Aging Research, and she is going to talk about exploration heuristics in development and impulsivity. Are you good to go, Magda?
Yes, I'm ready.
Okay, take it away, thank you.
Cool, thank you. Yes, so I'm going to talk about exploration heuristics, as John said. So what is exploration? So let's imagine that it's a warm summer day. You enter in an ice cream shop. There are plenty of different flavors, but you can only have one. So how do you choose? So most of the time you will exploit your knowledge and go for an option that you're sure to like. So for example, chocolate, because you've liked it many times in the past. But sometimes you might decide to explore new flavors to see if there is something even better than chocolate. In that case, there are different strategies for exploration. You could go for novelty, for example, hibiscus, because you're very curious about it. Or you could go for what you expect to like, for example, Toblerone, because you remember liking it once in the past. Or you could just pick with closed eyes, so randomly in a way. And the important feature of this strategy, compared to the others, is that it can lead to the choice of any option, even potentially one that you've disliked in the past, like spinach. And those strategies all have more formal names according to how they can be modeled, but I won't enter here into details. So here's a little overview. So as I explained through the ice cream example, humans are known to use different strategies for exploration. And we previously developed a task, a behavioral task, that allows to capture them. And we showed using pharmacology that one of them relies on noradrenaline. And based on previous studies, exploration is known to change during development. And exploration is also known to be increased in ADHD impulsivity, but in both those cases, it is unclear which strategy specifically. So what we were interested in here is, one, which specific strategy changes during development, and 2, which specific strategy is affected in ADHD impulsivity. So in the first study that we did, we tested a developmental cohort. So we had 3 age groups, children, early adolescents, and late adolescents, in total 97. And we made them play our behavioral test, which allows to quantify different exploration strategies. And we found that the closed eyes exploration strategy changed. So here we see the age group on the x-axis and the amount of closed eyes exploration on the y-axis in percentage. And we see that it was used more by the 2 younger groups and less by the older group. And to investigate our second question, subjects had also to fill some self-report questionnaires, including ADHD. And we found a correlation between the ADHD score on the x-axis and the amount of closed eyes exploration on the y-axis, suggesting that closed eyes exploration is linked to ADHD. We then were interested in whether we could reproduce this result. So we ran a second study. We had 580 adults play our task online and fill in some questionnaires. And we isolated and impulsivity factors across different questionnaires, including ADHD. And so in effect, we obtained this transdiagnostic impulsivity score, which we see on the x-axis, and we found a correlation between this impulsivity and the amount of closed eyes exploration used, meaning that closed eyes exploration is linked to ADHD. And so in summary, humans use different strategies for exploration. One of those strategies is to choose with closed eyes, and the usage of the strategy is increased in childhood and then seems to decrease during adolescence, and is also increased in ADHD and impulsivity. And with that, thank you to my supervisors and collaborators.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Magda. Again, beautifully to time. Essie sent me a message at the start saying she would go for the spinach ice cream, but I think personally I'll actually go for the hibiscus. So I am just keeping an eye on the hands. Okay, I can see one here from Alex Pike. Alex, do you want to go ahead and ask your question?
I don't think we can hear Alex. Maybe
Alex, turn your mic on.
Okay, can I ask a question while Alex figures out her audio system? So I'm just curious because presumably there will be some advantages for this closed-eyed strategy as well. So I'm assuming that it wouldn't have survived evolutionary selection if there weren't advantages for this sort of approach in some circumstances. And we are used to thinking about conditions such as ADHD and impulsivity as a sort of as clinical conditions, and perhaps in mainstream society in many ways they can be an impediment given the demands that people have in working life and education. But I'm just wondering whether you think that these are kind of strategies and a way of behaving that might be useful in certain areas of life. And if you were at school with children with these risk factors, for instance, could we direct them to do something where they can use this sort of style of information processing in a more adaptive way that could lead to sort of better outcomes? So can this be harnessed in a useful way?
Yeah, well, there are definitely advantages. One of them, for example, is that you don't keep track of any values or anything. So you spare a lot on your cognitive resources. But then how this could be used, I'm not sure. Maybe they would be better at multitasking or doing a lot of stuff at the same time, or they could be better at doing it in the long term. But yes, it's difficult to say in schools how it could be used.
Thank you. And then we just got time for one more question. Actually, we had two people ask a similar question. Elle and also Ella basically asked the question, why do you think this, what we might call undirected exploration, is more closely related to ADHD than other strategies like directed exploration, for example? What do you think is going on there?
Well, one thing is because in ADHD they have this hyperactive impulsivity bit, which is in general that you kind of make a choice without thinking too much and you do it fast. And this is exactly what happens in this closed-eyed exploration, where, as I just said, you don't keep track of anything, so you don't do any computation, so you do it in a very fast way. So maybe this could be why it's related to this.
Great, thank you so much. And with that, we're going to move on to the next talk. I'll call on Dr. Jian Woltencroft, who is a research fellow at the UCL Great Ormond Street Institute of Child Health. And I can see she's already started screen sharing. We can only see your desktop right now, Jian. There it is. We have your slides now. And she is going to speak on new approaches to social skills training, blended group interventions for girls with social communication difficulties. Are you ready to go, Jian?
I am ready, yes.
Thank you. Take it away.
Hello, everyone. I'm Jian. I'm based at the ICH, and today I'm talking a little bit about some work I did as part of my PhD in adapting a social skills training intervention from the face-to-face environment to an online setting. Ooh. So why are social skills important? They're really important because they help us to form friendships and relationships. And crucially, we know that if you have better social skills, your outcomes in terms of your health and education are much better. And critically, being socially isolated is toxic and associated with earlier cognitive and physical health decline. There's been an absolute explosion in the world of social skills research and social skills interventions, particularly in the field of autism. This here is an intervention called PEERS, the one that there's pictured on the slide, and it's a manualised intervention, and it's one of the programmes which has the best randomised control trial evidence behind it. How does it work? It involves 14 weekly face-to-face sessions, and you typically run a parallel parent group and a young person group at the same time. And it was designed for young people with autism without intellectual disability, with the aim of improving their social skills. Back in 2018, 2019, when I was doing this research, there was very little evidence for its efficacy in girls, which was important to me because I was working with a group of young girls who had a genetic syndrome, which is a rare genetic syndrome called Turner syndrome, which is characterized by the loss of one of your sex chromosomes as a girl. I was working with an age group of young girls, and for piloting this intervention with them, I chose to run it with some girls who were aged 16 to 20. None of them were intellectually disabled. They all had social skills difficulties, and they were motivated to do something about that to improve their social skills. Small N design, 7 girls taking part. It was part of a feasibility pilot, trying to see whether or not this intervention would work for them. So as part of my interviews before delivering it, I asked whether they'd be happy to come and see me once a week, for about 3 months in London. And they very politely said, yes, we'd like to do social skills training with you, but there's no way we're coming to see you face to face that often. So what we did is we adapted the programme so that it could be delivered as a hybrid model. There were 3 face-to-face sessions, 1 at the beginning, 1 at the middle, and 1 at the end, and every other intermittent session was done online. And I suppose we've got to remember that this was back in the day when Zoom was not a household name. So it was at the time, it was the first online adaptation of a social skills intervention. It worked incredibly well. We had no dropout. Everyone was very positive about the format. And I think importantly, within the context of rare genetic disorders, when you've got people living all over the country, it makes it a lot more accessible to people who otherwise wouldn't be able to attend. Encouragingly, we also got really good scores on our outcome measures, which suggested even with a small trial of 7 young women by the parent report and young person report, that we saw some improvements in social competence, improvements in social awareness and social motivation, and a massive improvement in gains in social knowledge. So I suppose to summarise, blended approaches to social skills intervention, whilst counterintuitive, do work really well, and I expect that in this pandemic / hopefully post-pandemic world, we'll be seeing a lot more published on social skills interventions or interventions in general delivered remotely. So thank you to all of my collaborators and participants.
Thanks so much, Jian, and again, perfectly to time, so thank you for that. I actually was going to ask a question as you were going through, really around this acceptability question, because it seemed like that was a kind of stunning level of acceptability, and I wondered how that compares to other types of interventions, maybe which have been delivered face-to-face more traditionally.
So I know that for PEERS, typically in what they've published on it for face-to-face research, the dropout rates are not that high, but they are, there is still a small percentage of dropout, which I suppose is inevitable to some extent. I think if you replicated this on a larger scale, you'd probably get similar levels of dropout. But on my small, very highly motivated trial with 7 people, everyone attended every session every single week.
Okay, that would be very interesting to look at in future work, wouldn't it? And then we've got a question from Sarah in the chat, who asks, how important do you think it was for the participants they all had the same rare diagnosis? Might that have contributed to the acceptability?
Yes, absolutely. I was very aware from session 1 onwards that they were all logging in to see each other and not me. It definitely gave them a lot in common, and I think that's why support groups in general for rare disorders are so powerful, because they connect people who are going through the same experiences.
Great, thank you so much. I'm afraid to keep the time, we're going to have to move on. We are actually almost perfectly to time so far, so thanks everyone so much for making sure your talks are on time. Next, I'm going to call on Dr. Sarah Griffiths, who is in Language and Cognition in the UCL Division of Psychology and Language Sciences. Sarah, do you want to have a go at sharing your slides?
Yeah, can you see them now?
1 second, they're coming, I think, on my screen anyway. Yep, they are there. So Sarah is going to speak on words for well-being, the role of language development in children's mental health. Take it away, Sarah.
Thank you very much. It's lovely to have the opportunity to share some of the work that I've been doing with colleagues from the Surrey Communication and Language in Education study, which is based in the Department of Language and Cognition. So SCALES is a longitudinal study that's tracked children's language development and associated outcomes from school entry, and the children are now in year 9. Sorry. So one of the key questions we wanted to answer with SCALES was how and why children's language difficulties are associated with mental health symptoms. So in order to answer the how question, we tested the nature of the association between children's language skills measured in year 1 using standardised assessments and teacher-reported mental health symptoms based on the Strengths and Difficulties questionnaire in year 3. And on this slide, I'm showing the results of analysis based on the emotional problems subscale. So what we found was there was a non-linear relationship between language and emotional problems, such that those children with below average language skills, in those children there was a relationship whereby poor language skills associated with more emotional symptoms. But this relationship was only true at the lower end of language. So once you had good enough language skills, better language was not associated with fewer emotional problems. And this relationship held true even when we accounted for earlier emotional problems and for other variables that are associated both with language and emotional outcomes, such as non-verbal IQ and socioeconomic status. So it seemed to be that there was something specific about having a language disorder that was making children more vulnerable to emotional problems. So our next step was to think about why this might be. So one of the mechanisms that we wanted to explore was children's emotional competence, because there are reasons to believe that children's language skills may help them to develop emotional skills. And we know that emotional competence is associated with good mental health outcomes. So when the children were in year 6, we got them to complete 2 tasks to measure their emotion recognition. I have to recognise emotions from faces and voices. I'm meant to share my sound, I don't think I have, but the sounds are just, they're just vocal sounds rather than spoken words. And we found that children's language in year 1 was associated with their ability to recognise emotions from both faces and vocal sounds in year 6. And this was true even once we accounted for children's non-verbal IQ. So again, it seemed to be something specific about language that's helping children to develop these emotional skills. A second emotional competence skill that we tested was children's emotion regulation. And we tested this using an experimental task in which children listened to upsetting scenarios and then had to imagine themselves either right after the scenario or at some point in the future. And this task is designed to measure how well children can use a temporal distancing emotion regulation strategy to make themselves feel better. So the difference between how children rate themselves as feeling straight after the event compared to in the future is a measure of their emotion regulation success. And we found that children's language ability in year 1 predicted their regulation success in year 6 on this task. And this was the case even once taking into account children's concurrent language. So of course this task requires language, but even once we've taken that into account, the current language skills into account, their early language still predicted their ability to regulate their emotions, suggesting that language skills are helping children to develop these emotional competencies. So our take-home messages are that children with speech, language and communication needs are at risk for poor mental health outcomes. And emotional competence might be a good target for interventions to promote children's mental health. So we think we should tailor interventions so they're appropriate for children with poor language, because of course a lot of emotional competence interventions do have quite a strong language component. But if we can target this, then it will be beneficial for children who have speech, language and communication needs. So thank you to everybody else who worked on this project with me from Scales and our funders. Thanks very much.
Brilliant. Again, perfectly to time. Thanks so much, Sarah. And I can see we have a question from Alex. Alex, hopefully your mic will work.
Hopefully you can hear me now.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you.
Great. Wonderful. Success. That was a really interesting talk. And I was just wondering, in terms of more specific language difficulties, if this is related to things like dyslexia. So I know for example, a lot of the prison population has dyslexia, and whether there's anything to do with specific language difficulties like that that might make it harder to either regulate your emotions, but also just harder to succeed in school, resulting in sort of what that kind of direction of effect is.
Yeah, so in this study, we tend to look at heterogeneous language disorders because we're interested basically in language in and of itself. So there will be children in our study who have dyslexia, but a lot of children with dyslexia also have oral language problems as well. So we've just looked at the group as a whole. And your point about doing well in school, I think, is a really good one, because here I've just focused on one mechanism, which is children's emotion regulation. But another possible mechanism is children do more poorly at school, and that leads to problems with their self-esteem, which also will make them more vulnerable to emotional symptoms, for example. And that's another mechanism that we're exploring in this study.
Thank you, Sarah. And I'll just point out that Courtney has also written in the chat that language disorder is also highly prevalent in the prison population as well, which does, of course, make a lot of sense. I think we'll probably have to move on because it's a bit tight on the timing. Thanks so much, Sarah. If you want to stop sharing your slides, I'm now going to call on Dr. Candela Sanchez-Bellot. Hope I got that right, Candela, who's a research fellow in the Department of Neuroscience, Physiology and Pharmacology in the UCL Division of Bioscience. Candela, do you want to try showing your slides? Oh, yeah, we can nearly see them. Yeah, just make it full screen, I think.
Let me to go in full screen.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. And Candela is going to speak on investigating the role of the ventral hippocampus in a rodent model of early life adversity. Take it away, Candela.
Right, so morning, I'm here to share my work on investigating the role of the hippocampus in a rodent model of early life stress. So what you can see here on the left is a rodent brain, and this banana-shaped structure at the back of the brain is the hippocampus. And the bottom half of this structure here, shaded darker, is the ventral hippocampus, also known as anterior in humans. And our lab is really interested in studying the circuitry within this structure, which supports behaviors like anxiety, fear, and reward. And it does this by projecting to a variety of downstream structures. So even though it might seem like a simple structure, it's actually densely packed with cells, cell populations projecting to a variety of downstream structures. And you can see that evidence here in this 3D reconstruction of a mouse brain, where cells have been traced in our lab, and they're color-coded here depending on their downstream target. So for example, yellow cells are projecting to the prefrontal cortex, or PFC. The magenta cells project to nucleus accumbens, and the blue cells project to lateral hypothalamus. And importantly, the hippocampus is a key node affected in a variety of mental health disorders, both in human patients and in rodent models of disease. So knowing that the hippocampus is made up of such a heterogeneous population of cells, I wanted to know how early life stress, which we know increases the risk for many mental health disorders, would affect different parts of the circuitry, for instance, by affecting their activity levels. And the way I modeled early life stress in rodents was by using a social isolation rearing model, which is a very well established and potent stressor in rodents. And as control, I had mice group housed for their rearing, and asked the question of whether this social isolation rearing would have cell-specific effects on the ventrohippocampal circuitry. And the way I answered this question was by taking brain slices containing the ventrohippocampus, and I went on to record from cells where I knew what their projection target was by having previously injected fluorescent markers where the color was dependent on where these cells project to. And I then went on to inject current steps into these cells and record their responses in the form of action potentials. And what you can see here is I'm recording from a cell that projects from the ventral hippocampus to the PFC. And the more current I inject, the more action potentials the cell fires. However, this increase in firing rate was significantly diminished in the same cells from mice reared in isolation. And this decrease in excitability in the cells was not seen in cells in the same brains that projected to the nucleus accumbens. So this suggests that the decrease in activity in the cells projecting from the ventral hippocampus to the PFC might be cell type specific, and that this pathway may be uniquely affected by early life stress. And as you probably know, the prefrontal cortex is also a key node affected in many mental health disorders. And this, for me, makes the ventral hippocampus to prefrontal pathway a very interesting connection to study. And right now, I'm very excited to look at the performance of these mice on tasks that require working memory, because working memory is a cognitive function which is supported by both the hippocampus and also the prefrontal cortex. And impairments in working memory are one of the main deficits caused by early life stress. But the mechanisms of how this stress may impair the ability to use working memory in tasks is unknown. And we think that this deficit might actually be caused by this reduction in activity in the cells projecting from the ventral hippocampus to the PFC that I've shown. So for instance, in this delayed non-match to sample task, working memory is necessary in that mice in the first trial need to go to one arm of this T maze to retrieve a reward. And in the subsequent choice trial, they have to remember what arm they went into in the first trial and now go into the opposite one to retrieve their second reward. And interestingly, it's been shown that mice reared in isolation fail to learn this task, and also that mice in which the communication between the ventral hippocampus and the prefrontal cortex is artificially silenced also fail to learn this task. So right now we're in the process of linking these findings to my finding I've shown you before, in that if we try and rescue the activity in these cells in isolated mice, will we also rescue their behavior in this task to control levels? And this would suggest that decrease in activity in this pathway caused by early life stress is a key contributing factor impairing working memory in mental health disorders. So with that, just to thank my lab and all of you for listening.
Thanks so much, Candela. Essie has messaged me saying she has a question. Do you want to go ahead first, Essie, then?
Thank you. That's really elegant work and really interesting to see the potential mechanism between the early life stress and these working memory impairments, which seem to be linked to many disorders. I'm wondering whether there are any methods in the animal models where you could study broader effects of this sort of cognitive impairment. So it's interesting that you see it in the kind of in the areas that you might expect, like the working memory. But I'm wondering whether you also see some social deficits in this mice that could be attributed, or cognitive deficits in some other areas where a working memory is a component. Because of course we know that the early adversity in humans has an impact on a variety of different areas, almost nothing that it doesn't impact. And it'd just be interesting to see whether there are just some more downstream effects that kind of account for this widespread difficulties that we often see in these populations.
Yeah, so in answer to both parts of your question, so there was a student in the lab that, well, I also have done some of these experiments, but we did test their social interaction levels, and they do interact less with other mice, where they will maybe adopt even more of an attacking position with other intruder mice rather than a curiosity of interacting with them. And they'll do less like sniffing of other mice and so on. And they will just prefer interaction with another mouse less than a control mouse. And then in terms of other cognitive impairments, other than working memory, we're trying to work in the lab now with attentional set shifting tasks, where you need to learn to pay attention to different parts of the task depending on what level of the task you're in. And they also seem to be like very poor on that task compared to control mice. So they're not very capable of keeping track of what rule they were paying attention to before, and now, oh, now there's a new contingency telling me the rules of the game are changing, I should change my strategy. So they're poor at like this cognitive flexibility aspect of tasks as well.
And if you were to enter your working memory measure to the equation, does it account for the set shifting? So I guess in many ways, it's just interesting to see to what extent this working memory is a gatekeeper to some of these more complex tasks. So you might be able to do analysis where you take your kind of their scores on the working memory performance and to see to what extent they account for the set shifting.
Yeah, I think if we included a delay in the when we present the cue that's telling the mouse, oh, the contingency is now changed, it would be a way of asking whether this mouse is actually impaired in working memory and therefore can't learn the new rule, or is it actually just the flexibility? So yeah, that's a really good suggestion to add a delay in the task for sure.
Lovely work, thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks so much, Candela. Fascinating discussion as well. Unfortunately, I'm afraid we do have to move on just because of the format. So next, I'm going to ask Maddie Moses-Payne, who's actually my own PhD student at the Institute of Cognitive Neuroscience. Maddie, are you right to share your slides?
Yeah.
Great.
Working on it.
Great
Okay.
job. And you've done your little trick presenter view, I see. Very clever. No one else knows how to do that. So Maddie is going to talk about a project from the first year of her PhD, which is the impact of valence on self-referential processing in adolescence. Take it away, Maddie.
Thanks, John. Okay, great. So I'm interested in adolescence, and adolescence is often defined as beginning with the onset of puberty and ending with the assumption of a stable adult role. So almost by definition then, adolescents have to figure out what that adult role is going to be. So in the first project of my PhD, which I'm presenting today, we asked how do adolescents reflect upon themselves in order to construct their sense of self. And this might be relevant or important for our understanding of mental health conditions such as depression, because low self-esteem has been shown to prospectively predict the onset of depression, and self-directed emotions such as self-hatred or self-deprecation have been shown to be central symptoms of adolescent depression. So in this study, we used a simple self-referential memory task. So participants are asked to rate how well different words describe them on a scale from 0 to 10. And they did this for a number of both positive words and negative words. As a control condition, participants are also asked to rate how well different words described another person of their choice. So here the participant chose to answer about Hermione Granger. And again, they do this for a number of positive and a number of negative words. And then later in the experiment, participants were given a surprise recognition memory test where they have to say whether they've seen a word previously. So we tested 210 female participants aged 11 to 30. So first I'm going to talk about this first part of the task in which participants rated how well words described them or another person. So I'm showing the descriptiveness ratings here on the y-axis and age on the x-axis. And I've split this for self-ratings and other ratings, positive and negative words. And interestingly, what we find here is that participants' willingness to endorse negative words about themselves, so this blue line on the right here, increased over the course of adolescence, peaked around the age of about 19, and then decreased again into early adulthood. So now if we take a look at this memory part of the task, I'm first going to show you the recognition accuracy for self-judged and other judged words. So here we replicated previous work to show that all participants showed a self-reference effect. So that means they correctly recognized more self-judged than other judged words. And further, we show that the younger participants, the younger adolescents, who are perhaps least certain about themselves and therefore most interested in making these self-judgments, they showed a larger self-reference effect than the older participants. And this decreased across adolescence and into early adulthood. And secondly, so here I'm showing recognition accuracy, but split by positive and negative words. And we showed that all participants remembered more positive than negative words, so showed this positivity bias. And here, younger participants showed a smaller positivity bias than older participants, and this increased across adolescence and into early adulthood. So just to summarize, willingness to endorse negative words about the self increased across adolescence, but recovered into early adulthood. Younger adolescents showed a larger self-reference effect and a smaller positive bias. And we're currently conducting some more work to look at how the onset of puberty might influence these processes, and how they're related to mental health symptoms. Thank you.
Brilliant. Thanks so much, Maddie. So I'll just pause for a second, just in case anyone wants to type a question into the chat or put their hand up. Actually, I can see that Alex has typed a question. I'll just give a brief opportunity in case anyone wants to put their hand up as well. So I'll ask the question in the meantime. So Alex asked, did you have any measures of subjective adolescence, if it's defined by age, for example, or the achievement of an adult role, and is that possible even to measure? And would you anticipate that that might relate even more to effects like this? So I guess in summary, is it just age, or is it really to do with something around sort of gaining your own independence in the world?
Yes, so I think I would argue that it's about kind of gaining independence and autonomy, and also exploring your social role. So I guess age here is almost like a proxy for experience as an independent, autonomous person in the world, who also has a kind of role in the social circle. And I think it's just really interesting to think about how adolescents learn from those experiences and explore and learn about themselves through exploring their kind of autonomy.
But is there a way in which we can actually measure that?
Yeah, I'm not sure how you would measure how the achievement of an adult role. I think especially in the West, people become kind of fully independent, financially independent at least.
I would suggest that you pick up your laundry from the floor would be a very good start in my house.
Was that your question, Essie? Brilliant.
No, it wasn't. I have a question regarding, so in one level it seems to be normative that you have a slightly more negative view of yourself or uncertain view of yourself at a particular age. And in a way, there's clearly no need to medicalize it. Most people negotiate this phase in their life and they become well-adjusted adults. I'm wondering whether you see any merit in trying to figure out whether there's some kind of a threshold at which somebody really departs from the age norm. So here is somebody who really thinks much more negatively than other people. And this could be a sort of a marker that here is a cause for concern and could be a flag for some kind of earlier preventative efforts.
Yeah, so I agree that thinking negatively about yourself could also be kind of adaptive, and it might help you to form a kind of multifaceted self-view. So we know children are kind of overly positive about their own attributes, and maybe in adolescence we're kind of realizing that it's a little bit more complicated than that, and that's why maybe we see this increase in negative ratings. I guess so one option is that some people rate themselves are particularly negative about themselves, and there's a threshold at which you're extremely negative. Another option is that some people don't kind of recover into adulthood. So some people might become very negative about themselves, and then that might stick and remain into adulthood. And that might be another kind of marker for risk for mental health conditions. So I think there's kind of two options. One is you're extremely negative, and the other is that it persists, and we don't really know what the answer is there yet.
Okay, thank you so much, Maddie. I can see I did get another question, but unfortunately, for reasons of time, we're going to have to move on because we are getting towards the end now. So if you want to stop sharing your slides,
Thanks so
I'm
much.
going to introduce our final speaker, who is Dr. Mia Eisenstadt, who's a research associate at the Evidence-Based Practice Unit, which, if people haven't heard about it, is a partnership between the Anna Freud National Centre for Children and Families and UCL. Mia, do you want to try sharing your slides? So very important collaboration in this area for UCL, and we're very happy to have it represented today. So Mia's going to talk about an absence of evidence or evidence of absence, the importance of evidence-based practice in child and adolescent mental health. Are you ready, Mia?
I am, thank you.
Please take it away.
Great. Yes, so I'm posing the question, is it an absence of evidence or an evidence of absence? And really when thinking about the whole evidence base in child and adolescent mental health. As everyone will be aware, there's a rise in psychopathology amongst young people and a rise in subclinical distress or symptomology, and many young people don't access therapy. So the challenge is that evidence in young people's mental health can be swampy and full of holes. And I wanted to draw attention to this quote where when applying sort of the lessons from the evidence base, so it's described by Donald Shawn as high, in the varied topography of professional practice, there's a high hard ground overlooking a swamp. On the high ground, manageable problems lend themselves to solution through the use of research-based theory and technique. In the swampy lowlands, problems are messy and confusing and incapable of technical solutions. So just to recap, what counts as evidence in this field? So obviously we've got meta-analyses and systematic reviews on the top, and then sort of background information, expert opinion, and often qualitative knowledge sits at the bottom. So the sort of implication of this is that we have a lot of high quality research on particular interventions. So for example, for CBT in relation to depression, sort of this particular meta-analysis found that there was 31 trials, high quality trials, that indicated a 63% chance of being less depressed at follow-up. But what about the remainder? And what about those young people that don't access therapy or are lost to attrition? In one of my own meta-analysis systematic review, in terms of the evidence base for digital mental health apps, you can see in this forest plot that kind of overall the intervention is favoured but relative to the control. But if you think in terms of the outcome of stress, but if we think about it, participants only spend sort of 10 to 20 minutes a day using a mental health app. So what are young people doing the rest of the time that influences their mental health? And is life beyond interventions understudied in this field? So another pyramid that I really like and wanted to bring attention to is sort of the role of self-care in the context of other levels of mental health support. And as you can see, self-care is actually the base of the pyramid and also accompanies the other levels, which are sort of most commonly studied. In a project that we did at the Evidence-Based Practice Unit, a longitudinal study, we asked young people what helps them with their mental health. And they talked about a range of self-care strategies for managing distress or bullying, or a range of sort of issues that young people were dealing with. But in terms of the evidence base, there is there's a bit of a lack of high quality evidence and control trials for self-care strategies, and the strongest evidence is actually light therapy for seasonal depression, as found in this recent systematic review. So just in summary, the self-care industry is absolutely huge and a predominant way that young people tell us that they cope with difficulties in relation to their mental health, but there's an absence of evidence. And the development of mental health disorders requires more research in understanding how self-care fits with what strategies are adaptive and effective and which are maladaptive. And therefore we need a sort of expanded research agenda that explores self and community in addition to sort of mental health interventions that are more commonly studied. Thank you. Thanks for listening.
Thanks so much, Mia. And we do have time for one question. If anyone wants to put something in the chat or put your hand up, I am attempting to monitor it. If not, I will ask. So I think I'll go ahead. I was actually really interested in this idea of this trial for self-care, and how you would actually do that in practice. What could what could a control condition look like in those circumstances? Because you sort of feel like it'd be difficult to tell people not to look after themselves.
Yeah, I think it's a really interesting question. I think you could find a group of young people that all have a common self-care strategy. So for instance, you could take a community of boys that are gamers, or that, you know, spend, you know, an hour or 2 hours gaming every day, and then you compare it, say, with a control condition, or you could have a range of self-care strategies. So say young people that talk to their friends for a couple of hours a night, and you could have different groups. Yeah, I mean, we'd have to think about it in more detail, but we know that there are things that young people do every day. And in some cases, you know, the evidence base is a bit limited.
And just quickly, there's one final question I can see Courtney and Aubrey put in the chat, which I think is a really interesting one about language. So, for example, if you're thinking about talking therapy, then obviously kids who have some kind of language impairment will find it quite difficult to engage. And is that something that's ever considered in these kinds of trials of talking therapies?
Yeah, I think that's an excellent point, and it's definitely a limitation with qualitative semi-structured interviews with young people, and suggest that you need a range of research methods, and it's probably a big factor that limits our understanding of young people, especially the younger age group.
Yeah, really, really interesting. So thanks very much to all of our speakers. We've come up against the hour, so we've got to move into our networking event. Maya's going to post now the Gather Town in the chat. In fact, I can see she did that simultaneously. So a bit of technical guidance is, if you've got your camera, definitely turn your camera off from Zoom, because then hopefully Gather Town will be able to use it when you go in there. And it's quite intuitive. The idea is that you sort of move around and you can move into different groups and go and talk to people. So please keep the Zoom on, stay on the Zoom if you possibly can. And then we're going to come back at 11:20 for the panel discussion. I don't know if you want to add anything else, Essie?
The Gather Town doesn't tend to work very well on Safari, so if you have Chrome, that's probably better to use. You may have to make an avatar, I don't know, but that's a very quick process if you do, and fun. And just wanted to say thank you to all the speakers. It's been just I've been completely blown away by the quality of the talks and the breadth of the research that has been presented. And it's just really, really exciting to see all of your amazing work. So thank you for presenting, and see you in the Gather Town.
Absolutely agree. I mean, it was absolutely fantastic session. And yeah, hope to chat to some of you in the web browser in a moment. Come back at 11:20, please. Okay, let's just give everyone a few moments to come back in. That was an interesting experience. I've never used Gather Town before. It was quite fun, actually. Maybe, yeah, Essie suggested next time we need to send everybody maybe a cup of coffee. Maybe that's what we should have done, Essie. We should have done a Deliveroo order.
I did not suggest a cup of coffee. I suggested a cocktail.
Right, but we're not going to give people cocktails at 11 o'clock in the morning, are we?
No, but we can have an afternoon or evening do next time.
That would be quite fun. Okay, let's just give 1 minute, and our panel. So Jessie, Tobias, Ramya, when you come back in, please turn on your cameras just so we can see you're here. Brilliant, thank you. And now I want you to imagine that you're seated on a stage in some uncomfortable chairs, looking a bit awkward, each with a glass of water in front of you and a microphone that you have to share in a sort of COVID non-compliant manner, just to get into the spirit of it.
We might suggest that people use the speaker view for this panel event, at least for the initial part of it. So the idea is, yeah, sorry.
What do we do, Essie? We go to the top right-hand corner, click view, and then speaker view. Is that right?
Yes, that's right.
Oh yeah, very nice.
So the panelists were asked to sort of consider number of questions relating to where the field is going, what they see being challenges and opportunities for early career researchers in this field, and what they think would be sort of helpful for early career research in this field. I think if we start with Jessie, and then Toby, and then Ramya, and then I think I would really encourage people to put questions or comments. It doesn't have to be a question, it could be a comment that is prompted by the panel discussion, which we can incorporate into the discussion. And John and I will probably contribute a little bit to the discussion as well when it's opened up. John, do you want to add anything before we?
I just want to really encourage people to put points in the chat, or even better, after the panelists have spoken, to turn on your microphone and put your hand up to ask a question, because we'd really actually like to understand what you guys think. I think it's often difficult as an early career researcher to make your voice heard and to think about policy in the university. And I'm not a big shot, but ESSE is a really big deal in children and young people's mental health research at UCL. And so if there's something that you think should happen, then you should tell us, basically, and ESSE is going to make sure it happens. Right, ESSE?
Right.
Great.
If it's within my gift, yes. But it is true that, one of the real foci of our strategy implementation is capacity building. So we do genuinely want to hear from you. And obviously, there may be things that are beyond John or my pay grade, but if there are things that we can influence, we definitely will do, and we'll try our best, and we want you to work with us to do that. So yes, please contribute and please think about things. So Jessie, do you want to start?
Yeah.
And thank you for making time for this.
Thanks so much, Essie and John, for inviting me to be part of this, and thanks so much to everyone else for really, really interesting talks. So I'm Jessie Baldwin. I'm a postdoctoral fellow in the Department of Clinical, Educational and Health Psychology. Okay, so in terms of the first question, where do we see the research on children and young people's mental health heading? What are the important new directions? So I think there are lots of important new future directions. Two brief examples, I think, are supporting children to recover from the challenges that COVID's presented in terms of their social development and mental health. And of course, developing interventions that can prevent mental health problems from developing in childhood. So one direction that I'm particularly interested in is understanding how children's perceptions and memories of adverse childhood experiences might have a greater impact on their mental health than the actual experiences themselves. So recent studies have suggested that it might not be the kind of actual adverse experiences that affect our mental health, but it might more be the way that we remember and think about these experiences. So, for example, studies on childhood maltreatment have suggested that childhood maltreatment might only be linked to later mental health problems when people remember the maltreatment that happened to them in childhood, and not so much for people who had objective evidence of being maltreated. So they had official records to show that, but they didn't recall it later on in life. And I think this could offer new hope for therapies, because it suggests that treatments that address the way that children and adults remember and think about adversities that have happened to them could potentially improve their mental health. So then, in terms of some challenges for ECRs, I think a really big challenge that affects both ECRs and more senior academics across disciplines is the current kind of publish or perish culture. So the pressure that we're under to publish a high quantity of papers, I think, is really damaging for a number of reasons. So firstly, I think in terms of the science, because it means that we feel under pressure to do things really quickly, and we're less likely to take the time that we really need to fully review and understand the literature in order to formulate original research questions, or to take the time that's needed to really understand and gain training in the methods that can adequately address these questions. And so it kind of promotes us to cut corners in research, which can reduce the robustness and reproducibility of our research, which is obviously really bad. And I also think in terms of researchers' mental health, it's really bad because it puts a lot of pressure on us to rush and to not take the time that we need. And it could mean that really talented ECRs might drop out because of this pressure to their mental health. Uta Frith has written a brilliant article promoting slow science, which is kind of the culture of, or the ethos of producing less, but taking more time to do things properly and make sure that we're kind of asking original questions or using really strong methodologies. And she suggests that we should try to maybe restrict the amount of papers that we publish to make sure that we are publishing only those studies that make a meaningful contribution. So I think maybe we can all get behind this kind of ethos of slow science a bit more. And then in terms of the opportunities and barriers at UCL specifically, I think one barrier that I previously perceived, which definitely doesn't exist so much anymore, but that was kind of a lack of integration across different departments at UCL. So I think especially pre-COVID times, we were all in different buildings across the city, depending on our department. So as a researcher working in clinical educational and health psychology, I rarely had face-to-face contact with researchers from other departments like epidemiology or psychiatry or cognitive neuroscience, despite the fact that many of us are working on similar research topics. And this could have led to more collaborations or interdisciplinary research, or just seeing things from different points of view. So I think the Institute of Mental Health is doing a brilliant job in addressing this, and kind of events like the one today and the conference that will be held later in the year are a great way for us to meet people across different departments. And hopefully when it's safe, we can start to do this in person a bit more too. So maybe a seminar series that take place across different departments could help to do this. And then another opportunity that I wanted to highlight is the Reproducibility Journal Club, which I should say I'm very biased because I co-organise it, but it's a regular journal club and talks on open science and reproducibility and kind of issues affecting ECRs in research. So it's a great way to learn more about open science and how to kind of apply these methods to our own research, and also to meet other ECRs across different departments and kind of support each other on our open science journeys. So that's everything that I wanted to cover, but I'm really happy to take any questions.
That's really great, Jessie. Absolutely brilliant. And I do want to sort of do a little advert for the reproducibility tea that Jessie runs. They're really, really brilliant events, and anyone who can go, it's definitely worth going at any time you can. I think we can take the sort of questions and comments at the very end when everyone has said their piece. And I can already see that there are things coming to the chat, which is absolutely brilliant. So we'll return to all of those once the panelists have all said their piece. So Toby, you're up next. And if you can introduce yourself and who you are, where you're from, what you're doing, and then respond to the questions that we said to you.
If I only knew that myself. All right, well, thanks so much for inviting me to speak here at the panel. And it's great to, just like see all these different talks that we had in the first round. It's really amazing to see what all the different bits across UCL are doing. So thanks, Essie and John, for putting this together, and for inviting me to speak at this early career research. I feel much younger now. So my name is Tobias Hauser. I have my group at the Max Planck Center for Computational Psychiatry, and I'm very interested in development and how it's related to computational and neural mechanisms and maturation. And yeah, being asked to predict the future of child and young people's mental health is obviously a big one, because we're terrible at predicting the future. And so I was just thinking of like actually thinking back and think about where we came from. And so I started my PhD in about 2010 in child and adolescent psychiatry. So really like the interest in kind of how these mental health disorders emerge or develop during adolescence. And back then I had the impression that like the field was hardly existent. There were very few child and adolescent psychiatry groups within Europe but around the world. There were no real consortia like we had now, like ABCD. There wasn't even heard, like those big studies weren't really there. And from my own field, there was literally no work on computational modeling or anything in development. That was like even just emerging in adulthood. And my experience was also that there was very little exchange between the more clinically oriented groups and the, let's say, basic normative developmental cognitive neuroscience group. And often I had the impression that child and adolescent psychiatry in particular was often patronized and looked down upon from adult psychiatry. And so if we look at where we are now, it's like a huge change, right? So we have these seminar series, we're talking about this, we're taking the field seriously. Just looking at my own field, developmental computational neuroscience is a field in of its own right, with a journal, with meetings, and there is the shift from these people which originally come from normative development into psychiatry. So being interested in how these developmental trajectories affect mental health, and I think that's a huge change where we're really gaining traction and importance. And obviously there are these big longitudinal studies like ABCD that I mentioned, which put us in a completely different place in terms of the power or the data that we have. And this is really all showing a paradigm shift that we're having, where we've known that adolescence is the vulnerable period for most mental health disorders, and finally this is being acknowledged, and that we are not stepping out of being junior partners to, let's say, adult psychiatry, but we're actually a field in its own right. And this is going in line with the big funding calls that were mentioned in the beginning, like UKRI or Welcome. And I think we're actually way ahead of the curve. So if I look back to Central Europe, I think there is still like more of the old system. So we are ahead of the curve, which is great. So the future looks bright. We get a lot of funding, but I think the question is what for? And I think we are at a really crossroad moment where we need to define ourselves as a field and actually decide on and make sure that we're going to be lasting. So, for example, most of the funding is really just focusing on treatment, which is important. We heard that before in the talks that we know very little about evidence-based treatment in adolescence. But there's also a risk of just falling back to clinical studies. I think this would be for a missed opportunity because we know very little about cognitive and neural development and how this is related to mental health. And if we ignore this aspect, then we will never know how these processes go awry, and we probably never go beyond something that we're struggling at the moment in all of psychiatry, which is understanding mechanisms and developing treatment based on these mechanisms. And so we need to understand, and we need to figure out ways where we go beyond just funding clinical treatment studies, which have been mainly the focus of UKRI and are likely also to be the focus of Welcome, and kind of implement like a more mechanistic understanding. And this needs longitudinal studies, which I think we all sign up to, and probably slightly more cutting edge and more targeted than these big studies like ABCD. So the challenges for the field that I see and this applies to ERC as well, is on the one hand that it's very interdisciplinary. So we have like, we heard it from animal models to very applied clinical ones, which is a challenge to bring this together. And I think UCL has an excellent plan, but I think it's also, the challenge is also to emancipate ourselves as people are interested and have been always interested in the developmental aspect and mental health. So we've seen a lot of attention and a lot of interest now also from people that are usually in the adult area. And I'm just worried that this is going to be a funding party and lots of people are coming in, taking the money while it's available, and then move on, as we see so often in research. And this is really a real danger for us, because we want to develop a sustainable and long-lived research area and field, and also foster the young people to have that in mind and establish ourselves, even if the limelight of funding is going away again. And so I think the key challenge of young researchers here is really the interdisciplinarity. So how can our trainees gather a sufficiently holistic view on these different areas? I mean, we've seen lots of different areas, and it's very interesting to see, and probably great for people to see what other people are doing. But I think that the key challenge is, how do we bring that more closely together? How can we train people that they are not just experts in one area? Just very concretely, for example, how are our researchers that do full-time research, which don't have a clinical background? It's very helpful maybe if they get some clinical insight as well. I very much benefited from my time working in child and adolescent psychiatry on the ward, and that is very difficult to achieve, I think, for pure research groups. And the other key challenge for the young ones, and I'm about to stop, is whether they get their time to shine. So for the studies that are being planned, that are going to be funded, these are usually huge studies with longitudinal interventions, that it's very complex, which means that they are very likely to be awarded to very senior PIs. And it's going to be a huge challenge for the younger researchers to have a say, have an impact, and make a lasting, make a career out of themselves, because again, the money is going to the ones which are already rich. And I think that is a real challenge, especially because nowadays you can mostly only achieve stuff if you have longitudinal big studies, which are just extremely costly. And so we probably should think about ways of enabling the young researchers to put forward their ideas and realize them in the context of where it actually has some impact. And there are different grassroots collaborations like the Many Babies project, which have used smaller fundings and put together to achieve kind of big sample studies. And so I'll stop with that because I'm way over my 5 minutes.
Thanks, Toby. Lots of really, really important points and thoughts there particularly resonate with this challenge of how you can help people establish themselves when there is this big team science. And in a way, you know, and we can discuss this when there is a broader discussion. Maybe there should be mechanisms to encourage more team science rather than this cult of PI, which I think has implications for distorting science in unhelpful ways that Jessie also brought up. So if we can move on to Ramya now for her panel contribution. I can see lots and lots of points coming in on the chat, which is absolutely brilliant. So we can then return to those after Ramya has had her turn.
Well, hi everyone. Thank you so much to John and Essie for inviting me to speak today and for such a series of interesting talks and thoughtful discussions. I've really enjoyed the morning so far. So my name's Ramya and I'm a Wellcome Trust Clinical Research Fellow in the Division of Psychiatry, and I also work clinically as a child and adolescent psychiatrist in East London. So in terms of, I suppose, thinking about where research in this area is heading and the sort of important directions, firstly, I guess similar to Tobias, I just want to say that I feel that research in this area seems to have dramatically taken off in recent years, which I think is brilliant and absolutely a step in the right direction. I feel like we talk about it more in general as a society, and it's seen as a priority, which is really great. And now the task is really to build on this momentum to really develop the field as something in its own right. And in terms of sort of the next steps and directions, I feel we're at the stage where we're really starting to, do some work in terms of getting our heads around population level mental health, potential prevention and early intervention strategies, and also starting to make headway with understanding some of the potential underlying mechanisms. But I do feel the next step needs to be to think about how these sort of more academic developments, I suppose, get translated into the real world, which I guess is always the big challenge. And also thinking about how we still hold in mind the most vulnerable children, young people in our research. So for example, I do my clinical work in an adolescent inpatient unit, and there we see some of the most significantly affected young people. And I often feel that whilst the interventions offered are evidence-based to some degree, it's usually based on a completely different population. So for example, it's extrapolated from research in young people with the same diagnosis, but really quite a different presentation, or sometimes even from adult populations, which is really not so ideal. And I think this links to also what Tobias said, where we need to understand the mechanisms in these populations and also think about the interventions in those groups as well. And I think that we need to think a bit more about how we start to conduct more research and develop interventions where in groups where it does take more thought and effort to conduct research, which is what I think Mia sort of briefly touched upon in her introduction, where, we've got this hierarchy and maybe we need to think a little bit more differently about that. And this also relates to my earlier point about translation, where maybe we think a bit more carefully about the specific groups of people that we're trying to translate to, and we adapt or develop our approach and clinical pathways accordingly, which I think was nicely illustrated by Jian in her talk, where actually she adapted the intervention based on the feedback that she received. In terms of the most prominent challenges for early career researchers in this area, apart from the general challenges facing early career researchers, for me, at least, the overarching challenge is the development of skills and expertise across, a broad area. I suppose that sort of interdisciplinarity that Tobias referred to, but whilst continually keeping in mind a sort of more nuanced developmental perspective when thinking about psychopathology, which I think some of the questions that were asked around Maddie's talk touched upon. And I think there are sort of many different perspectives and levels at which research can be done. And in many ways, children and young people are no different to adults in that they live in the same world that we live in and they move through the same world that we do. So we need to think about them in the same way, but still just keeping in mind that developmental approach and how they may experience the world. And so, as we know, children and young people are constantly changing. So we may need to think about a given presentation or a given question differently, depending on the developmental stage that we're considering and how these things change across time. And always hold this in mind when we're designing and conducting and interpreting research. So, for example, we might go to a course to develop skills on, say, qualitative research, but actually a lot of skills and training is based on adults. And so then you need to then additionally think about how to tailor your research or your question across a range of age groups, and also then thinking about how mental health develops and presents across these age groups. And I kind of think this also relates a little bit to what Jessie was saying earlier about slow science, which I love the concept of, because I think this extra thought does take a bit more time and thinking, and that's needed to conduct the high quality research. And I guess relating to what I was saying earlier about the importance of clinical research and translation, I think that these issues can mean that it's difficult to access and conduct clinical research, particularly early on in one's career, as it can take time to develop the expertise and I suppose for want of a better word, the credibility, as well as build the kind of necessary relationships that you need to do this research, particularly when you're trying to involve children and young people and their families. And I think, you know, the range of talks that we've had today really reflect these issues, and all the presenters appear to have navigated the challenges very successfully, which is really heartening to see. In terms of opportunities and barriers at UCL, for me, these kind of relate to the last point that I was trying to make. I feel that there are a lot of people working in this field at UCL with different perspectives and different approaches, as reflected by today's talk. And so this means that there is, you know, an incredible depth and breadth of knowledge and expertise in the field here. So, you know, so for example, we can think about children in education, you know, work at Institute of Education, think more cognitively, and also, you know, considering animal models as mentioned by Candela. And of course, we've also got good links with clinical settings such as at Great Ormond Street, at UCLH and local mental health trusts, all of which provide incredible opportunities. But on the other hand, I think the size of UCL and the range of knowledge and expertise available can also make it a bit daunting in terms of knowing where to start and keeping tabs on everything that's going on, and just, you know, getting in touch with people and developing those collaborations. So I guess, you know, that's why these seminars have been, you know, wonderful, and the event that today's talks, you know, have been a part of, because it really helps, you know, to bring people who may not have known each other together, and helps us all to learn from each other, develop new ideas and techniques, and hopefully, you know, longer term develop collaborations which will help us move the field forward. So more of this would be wonderful. Thank you.
Thank you hugely, Ramya. Thank you all the panel members. This has been really, really brilliant. And we're definitely planning to have more of these events, and we hope that people are enthused by the first one and that we'll go from strength to strength. I'm going to pass on to John to sort of moderate the discussion from now on.
Thank you, Essie. So there's been a lot of activity in the chat. I'm going to very briefly reflect and thank the panel members for actually really incredibly thoughtful contributions. There's so much to think about here. I guess it falls into sort of different categories. In a way, they do interrelate those. So, you know, part of it is sort of around opportunities for career development and what, you know, what's going to be considered for people going on to the next stage of their academic career. And I think Jessie made that point really nicely. And there's another part around how we manage sort of clinical and scientific collaboration, which is, you know, always been a difficulty. I can remember when I first came to UCL. I hate to think of it, it's actually 15 years ago now, and desperately trying to find our psychiatry department, which wasn't called the psychiatry department at the time. It was part of the epidemiology division. And finding it really very daunting, as you said, Ramya, to sort of navigate the size of the university. And it's now the university is probably twice as large in some ways as it was, certainly in terms of the number of students. So even more difficult, and very important to be able to have these opportunities. And then, yeah, thinking also about Toby's point in terms of like what the resource requirement is, and to the extent to which we're actually able to facilitate that at UCL. Obviously, there's a certain amount that can be done. The interdisciplinary aspect is very important. IOMH runs an annual grant call, but it's really only for a relatively small amount of money. You know, it's about £10,000 or something. Nothing, you know, orders of magnitude off what you really need to set up a decent interdisciplinary longitudinal study. So there's some huge challenges here. I have seen comments in the chat that I think deserve sort of proper discussion from Courtney and Alex, Maddie, Lenny, Priya, Joseph. Those are the ones that I can see initially. If any of you would feel comfortable sort of phrasing your comment as a kind of question to the panel, or as a comment to the panel, that would be really great. And you could turn on your mic and, if you can, your camera. So if any of you who I've just mentioned who put the comments in the chat would feel comfortable doing that, please could you just put your hand up now, and we'll try to sort of run this as more like a kind of panel discussion, because I think it can be quite difficult to sort of navigate, but especially if people are only on one screen between the chat and the Zoom. So I can see, Alex, you've put your hand up already. So would you like to sort of formulate your point as a kind of question or a comment to the panel, and if there's any particular panel member?
Yes, this is
more just kind of a question to everyone, but I think we say a lot about how it's important to collaborate between different fields and different expertises, but I feel that actually as scientists, maybe we could be doing something to understand what actually fosters collaboration rather than having, you know, another seminar, another group, because I know it's very easy to go to these things and only speak to the people that you know already, or particularly online, it can be hard to actually form those connections. So I was wondering if any of you had any insights, or if there is actually any evidence saying that there are particularly good ways to foster collaboration across different disciplines.
That's a really great question, very tough question for our poor panel. Who fancies having a go?
Well, I've just got a really kind of basic answer. I think, I don't know about kind of all the evidence-based approaches, but I think although I totally agree with what you're saying about seminars, there's definitely a tendency for people just to speak to the people that they know. I think the kind of seminars that are more social focused, where there are like coffee or maybe drinks afterwards, and actually time is made like half an hour or maybe more if it's at the end of the day for networking, those are the places where it's easier to speak to other people rather than just a standalone seminar where people turn up, watch the talk and then leave. Yeah, so just maybe some time for socializing afterwards.
Could I also add, so one of the reason we set up the Catalyst seminar series was precisely to foster interdisciplinary interaction. And we tried to do that by pairing speakers up who can speak to the same topic, but from different traditions. And so that people can see what is going on in a particular topic area and become aware of colleagues across a big institution like UCL. And I also think that the PhD program that John has set up is a good example of how you might foster interdisciplinarity, in that people are rotating in different labs, and then the requirement is that they will have 2 supervisors who come from different disciplinary traditions. So you essentially have students who get a more interdisciplinary training and viewpoint than they might otherwise. So I think that I really agree with sort of having events where you can socialize. And I think it could also be, rather than being just sort of serendipitous, you have a coffee, which are also very important, and some of the best ideas get formed that way. We could also think about more formalized ways of sort of almost like speed dating, or putting people to discuss ideas with the necessarily a pressure that anything needs to come out of it, but just giving people opportunities to connect in a little bit more structured way. And that's, I think, something that we could certainly do in the Early Career Forum. And it would be really great if you guys, you know, if you can find an evidence base of what's good, great. But if you have ideas of what you think might work for you subjectively, why don't you drop John and I a line, and we can sort of, as we start more formalizing how we can keep these ECI events going. We obviously want some of you to sign up to contributing and being part of it, but I think we can start formalizing these things as well.
Thanks, Essie. Tobias, Ramya, would either of you like to respond? Certainly not mandatory, to sort of Alex's question about how we can actually do this in practice.
I think I was going to say something very similar to Jessie. I think having a space where there's an opportunity to socialise, as well as think academically, I think is useful. And I think making it structured, maybe, as you were suggesting, would stop the kind of clustering with just the people you know.
Thank you.
Just a short note on that. I think the seminar series is excellent for us to actually see what is out there. I've come across a lot of research which I didn't know before, so that's the starting point. And then definitely the best collaborations usually start over coffee or a pint, where you talk directly. And then the challenge is to maintain it, because we're all very busy. I think one thing that we haven't really touched upon, which I think is important, is not just like scientific collaborations, but also opportunities for training. And yes, like John's mental health PhD program definitely forces the few elected ones to experience that. So I think on a bigger scale, it would be interesting to have like training across different levels. Like, we have experts on whatever, longitudinal modeling, growth curve modeling, whatever. Yeah, we have people that know computational modeling and so forth. We all do our training, we all train our people, but very limited to our own groups. And if we were to be able to bridge that, that would be excellent. So for example, we're running a workshop on computational modeling for the developmental neuroscience researchers at Flux, one of the big conferences there. I think that's the way to go forward, and like have more at least introductory training for people from outside the field, because I think there are many things that are relevant and we don't necessarily have access to. Thanks, Toby. Does anybody else who put a comment in the chat feel comfortable formulating your comment as a question to the panel? You could just turn your camera on or put your hand up and I'll call on you. If not, then I might reformulate it for you, which is dangerous. Okay, Priya.
Hi. I feel like I ought to say something because Alex and I got into a nice little interesting discussion there in the comments. And I guess it's not really a question, guys. I think it's more just a comment. So I've just started my welcome PhD, but as a clinician, so I'm a child and adolescent psychiatrist. I've come from a very heavy clinical world and I've jumped ship into this academic world, and it is a jump. It feels quite different. The way that people work is very different, and I guess I'm just sort of thinking a little bit about some of my clinical colleagues, about at times conversations that perhaps have been had about this feeling of being somewhat disconnected to what's going on in the academic child and adolescent psychiatry world. And I wondered if perhaps you guys have any thoughts on that, or any experiences in your own work of, I know Rami, of course, you're a fellow clinician, and Tobias, you mentioned as well, I think that you've done some clinical rotation perhaps at some point. But either way, it would just be really interesting to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, and we're just going to have the thoughts a little bit brief here because we've only got a few minutes. We might be able to go a couple of minutes over, but I'm conscious we need to respect people's time. So yeah, I think a few brief responses would be good.
Maybe very briefly, I think like it was fairly easy if research is located in, let's say, a psychiatric hospital, then the exchange was way more natural. I think at the moment with like UCL not being attached to a particular hospital, that is always a challenge to work together with the different trusts and establish these connections. We've been very eager to, whenever we ran studies, that the local clinicians on the ground came in and even like experienced what kind of research we're doing. But it's extremely challenging also, but very important also for recruitment for our study. If we find a way to bring that more closely together, yes, that would be amazing. Thank you. Rami, are any thoughts?
I completely agree with you, Priya, and I think that there's potentially, my feeling is almost there's maybe a little bit of kind of, I don't know what the word is, misunderstanding on both sides, where I kind of think clinicians don't really understand what research involves and requires, and I think sometimes people who are completely academic don't quite understand the pressures of, like the pressure that clinicians are under. And often, like, I sort of feel that when I was clinical, you're kind of almost dealing with your most urgent task. So actually things like research just they sit on the back burner rather than kind of being at the forefront of your mind. And I think what would help is kind of, maybe meeting each other a bit more, as Tobias was saying, but also I think maybe I'm being naive, but I'm a little bit optimistic as well, because I do feel like, since I started, like lots more people like us are coming through. And so hopefully there are going to be more people who are going to be straddling the two worlds and can, bring academics and clinicians a bit closer together and, help improve that sort of collaboration. But that might be naive, but that's what I'd hope.
Okay, thank you. So I can see we've run up against 12 o'clock. I did actually see that Lenny had her hand up before. Lenny, you might just want to make your point very briefly, because I'm sure it's a good one, and then maybe we'll close. Do you want to go ahead? Oh, you're on mute. Sorry, Lenny.
Yeah, this is something I noticed that I think potentially we have different kind of understandings of what makes good quality science in different disciplines. And I'm just wondering if that might potentially be holding the field back, because we have different ideas of what's rigorous science. For example, like ethnographic studies might not really be even on a radar of like some psychiatrists and vice versa.
Yes, Jessie, I wondered if you'd like to briefly respond to that, just because you didn't speak to the last point. What do you think about the sort of different disciplines and what counts as kind of acceptable?
Yeah, I think that's a super important point. I don't think that we should be, well, I don't think that somebody's research and the quality should be necessarily judged by people from different disciplines who aren't experts in that field and who wouldn't know what would be most appropriate. So I hope that that's not really the case. Yeah, I don't have much more to say on that one.
Okay, thank you, Jessie. So we are over time now. I do think probably it's best to close, because unfortunately people probably start leaving anyway. I just want to thank all of the speakers from my side, the part that I chaired, which I just thought was mind-blowing, really. It is incredible just to see the breadth of research that's going on, and in terms of the quality as well, really important. And you know, it sounds a bit corny to say it, but you guys are the future, and that actually makes me feel somewhat reassured in a way. Essie, would you like to finish?
Yes, so I just really wanted to thank all the panelists who were brilliant and brought up really pertinent issues for discussion, all the people who gave the talks, which were just mind-blowingly good. I really feel like great beacons of hope for the future. So I was more than reassured. I was absolutely delighted to see the brilliant science. And I hope that we can continue these events and we can revisit some of the issues that were brought up in the panel discussion in future events, and also think about how we can facilitate more interdisciplinarity, better clinician-scientist connection, and also really strong early career training that is rooted in right kinds of values. I think your generation really has an opportunity to change the kind of way in which we do science, which I think has been slightly off course perhaps in the past few decades. So I'm hoping that we can all be sort of part of generating really exciting science, exciting collaboration, exciting research culture. And we'll be tapping on different shoulders to get you to mobilize different events. So please stay engaged and please volunteer to contribute, and please contribute when we beg you. We look forward to seeing you in new events in the next academic year. So thank you very much.
Thanks, everyone.
See you all soon.
Bye-bye.
Thanks.
Bye.
Bye.
Thanks,